And we've had it. I mean, we understand the pain. We've had it real close. So we don't want that to happen again. Okay, if you will open up your Bibles to the book of Genesis, we have a horrifying story in front of us today. That's all it's horrifying. And it is it's one of those stories. By the way, we're into the horrifying part of the book of Genesis. There's one sordid story after another. But the Holy Spirit had it written for a reason, because there's so much that we can learn from it. And, this one is, it's not a fun one, but it's one that we have to come to grips with, because we find out so much about human propensity to respond to violence disproportionately, even when it's God's people. And so we'll talk about that today. The other subtext is the people of Israel were supposed to be separate from the nations of Canaan, or the people of Canaan. And there's a real threat to that going on in today's story. And so I grabbed onto that and gave it the title today, Keeping God's People Separate, because that's really what was going on. Now, the way that he kept them separate, there's so many better ways they could have responded. But the very interactions they had, they didn't respond in the best possible way. So we'll talk about that as we go along. Today we are talking about Dinah, a young man named Shechem, and the city in which they dwelled. As I explained last week, it was Salem. It wasn't the Salem that Melchizedek was in, but it was later became known as Shechem, named after the young man. But it wasn't named Shechem yet. It was named Salem. That's pretty clear from the translation, although many of the modern versions will just put in the city name as Shechem. But anyway, Genesis 34, 1 through 31. So we got a bunch to go through today. However, it's all narrative, and we'll get through it in relatively short time. So we are starting with verse 1. This is after they've moved into Canaan, and they're living next to the Salem, the city of Shechem, the young man who we were already introduced to, because he's a significant figure. Now, one time after the kids were all grown up, that's not really in it, but that's what's going on. One time, Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she gave birth to for Jacob, went out to see the daughters of the land. Shechem, the son of a leader in the land, Hamor the Hivite, saw her and abducted her. He overpowered her and had sexual relations with her. His soul bonded to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. He loved the young woman and spoke to the young woman's heart. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, and he said, "Take this girl for me as my wife." This is a horrifying start to the story, and it only gets worse. Okay, this is awful. And so let's parse our way through it as we go along. She went out for a visit. Now, you can't just think that one day Dinah got up, walked out the tent, and said, "See you at supper." That didn't happen. In those, remember, Jacob was a very powerful sheik, lots and lots of resources, lots and lots of servants. At a minimum, she would have gone out with attendants to protect her and to help her. And so she desired to visit with the women of the land, obviously. And so she would have gone out with attendants. No one would have sent a young woman out alone in that culture. Banish that thought from your mind. But it tells you a little bit more about Shechem when you realize that. Because when it says he abducted her, it means he had to get through some people. But if the attendants were female, or if he had a retinue, it says clearly his dad was the leader of the city. They couldn't do anything about it. It would be akin to when Pharaoh showed up by Abram, and Abram thinks he's going to snooker everyone by saying, "She's my sister," because when they come to negotiate, they have to come to the brother. And so Abram thinks, "Hey, I'm going to set this up so that everyone has to come to me, and I'm just going to say, well, here would be the bride price, or we'll have to talk about it, or there's this issue or that issue," and he could delay and delay and delay until they were out of Dodge. And so they were like, and by the way, anybody from another nation listening today, that means out of the area. Okay, that's an idiom. Okay, but I just realized what an idiom that is, and someone watching from overseas, and we do have a fair amount of that, would say, what does that mean? Anyway. So, but they'd be, Abraham would have been long out of the area, and that was a great plan until Pharaoh showed up. You don't negotiate with Pharaoh. Pharaoh shows up and says to Abraham, hey, Abraham, I'm taking her. Your sister's mine, and I'll send you more dowry than you can even begin to imagine. And he really poured out the gifts on Abram. Problem with Abram, his whole plan had gone south. That means it had not worked. But the whole thing it was gone. His plan was gone because Pharaoh showed up, and wherever Pharaoh went, there were a lot of guys with spears, and Abram couldn't respond. Shechem would have been exactly the same way. I mean, he showed up, and no matter how many people were with Dinah, you understand, they didn't think there would be any problems when they sent Dinah out. So their attendance would have been a couple attendants if there were men with weapons. And if Shechem showed up with many more men than that, you don't fight. Everyone would just get killed. You just have to respond. By the way, it says later that Jacob heard. That's why he heard. The attendants came back and said, this is what's going on. And so anyway, she went out to visit. Shechem violated the cultural mores, just out the window. You were supposed to honor the women who were out and about among you. This was a man who had not been restrained by his father. That's pretty clear from what's coming. Okay? And he had not been taught how to be a civilized young man. And so what he did is he just took her. He abducted her. He overpowered her, and that's a rape, okay? Because he had all of the force and all of the authority, and he may not have physically overpowered her in the sense that, made her submit by force, but by the fact that there was armed intervention, she was stuck, okay? And so he began to woo her, ended up having sexual relations with her. His heart, his soul was drawn to her then, and he loved her, and so he spoke to the young woman's heart. What that simply means, because it says, that's what he said, he spoke to her heart. What he was trying to do is to get rid of the offense that he had just committed and convince her of his love for her. Then he goes to his dad, and he says, get the girl for me. And by the way, he uses the word girl. I mean, just it's kind of it's not like a highly elegant reference to someone that you say you're deeply in love with. Get the girl for me. So it is like he's wooing her, but he comes out and demonstrates that the same reason he abducted her. He had very low opinion of women. That's clear. If you have a high opinion of women, you don't do what he did. You don't violate the cultural mores. And so he was someone who was an issue, okay? Caused all sorts of problem for his people and for Israel and all of those things. So verses 5 to 7. Jacob heard that he had violated his daughter Dinah. However, his sons were with his livestock in the countryside. Jacob held his peace until they arrived. Then Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him. The sons of Jacob had come in from the countryside when they heard the news. The men were deeply grieved, and they burned with intense fury because he had committed an act of shameful lewdness against Israel by being sexually intimate with the daughter of Jacob, something that should never be done. So now we hear how the sons are doing. It says that Jacob heard about it. I already told you the attendants would have come back and say, this is what happened. And Jacob, because he doesn't have his family around him, decides not to respond clearly. Some people try to paint this as Jacob was shy and retiring. That's not really Jacob's nature. Okay. It's usually a schemer, but he got changed to Israel. And now that his nature's been changed by God to Israel, by the way, you'll notice it says this act of lewdness was against Israel. The nation had not yet come into existence. It means against the new thing that God was doing in Jacob. And it goes back and it talks about Jacob again, the daughter of Jacob, but because why? She was born when he was still Jacob. And now he's Israel. Okay. So we've got this situation. Jacob did not act. The family came in and they were burning with rage. It says, I think it's in one of the Proverbs that, if you go and you, and this is talking about a married situation, but a man who has an affair with another man's wife is heaping coals into his lap. And that's not about deep anger and damage. I mean, and a lot of times you end up dead when you do something like that, at least in those ages. And it can still happen because you're not paying attention to human nature. And so he thought with impunity he could do this to a member of the tribe of this group that's living, and he could, over near them, and he would not have any problems, forgetting about human rage. And maybe he wouldn't have had a problem if that would have happened to someone in his retinue, but he was dealing with a group that was far different than anything he had ever dealt with. So those guys have burning rage going on. This to them is an incomprehensible offense. And they're having a real hard time with it. That end thing. Something that should never be done was done. And they're besides themselves with rage over what had happened. So we've got Hamor trying to make the best of it. I mean, you can understand. He's trying to make the best of it. Hamor spoke with them and said, "My son Shechem in his soul loves your daughter. Please give her to him for his wife. Let our families be joined in marriage. Give your daughters to us and take our daughters for yourselves. You will live with us and the land will be before you. Live and trade in it and also obtain property in it." And you'll notice the apology is absent. Because it is so offensive what Shechem did, you just got to kind of paper over it. Everyone knows this is a problem. And so Hamor's trying to deal with this thing that his son did by making something good out of it that'll benefit both tribes in his mind. And so, this is something. So he's selling it. He's trying to bring conciliation to the event. He's trying to help get the offense away, and let's work something out so that we can live together in peace. By the way, militarily, there's no doubt that Hamor's got the upper hand. Jacob's a sheik, but he doesn't have a walled city. And he doesn't have probably the numbers by any stretch of the imagination, the numbers that Hamor has available to him of troops who are ready to go out. And so he's got the upper hand. We find out later, by the way, they still got Dinah. You understand the power that gives them in the negotiation? They haven't released the young lady. They still got her. And so that, in and of itself, is an act of power. If you were sorry, you would bring the young lady. And you'd say, here, we want to make this right. They didn't do it. And I'm not doing this to deconstruct the attempt by Hamor to try to make things right, a bad situation that his son had created. However, I want to point out the power dynamics. Okay, it doesn't mean Hamor wasn't sincere, but the power dynamics were tipped in his favor in a very big way. And that's what was going on. Hamor's trying to get some reconciliation, some conciliation going because of this major offense. So he's going to paper this thing over with the marriage, with a marriage, and he's highlighting this is the positives. Right now, you're just a tribe. You've got hundreds of people maybe. But, if you come and be a part of us, we can intermarry. There'll be more daughters available to your young men, and we'll have more, interchange, daughters given, daughters taken. Everything will be fine. You'll be able to live and trade in the land and obtain property in it. This is, like right now they'd be limited on how much property they could buy because they weren't a member of Hamor's tribe. And so they would be limited on how much economic success they could have. But if they do this, hey, it's going to be good for all of us. And you can see he's working it. He's trying to work it. He's trying to make it work out so there's peace between them. By the way, it's not going to work. In Genesis 24, when Abram is sending his servant to get a wife for Isaac, he says, "You will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I am living, for you will travel to my land and my relatives and take a wife for my son Isaac." Remember, that's how Abraham, the patriarch, had started things out. And then when it was time for Esau and Jacob to be married, Esau took his own wife and ended up really being an offense to his mom and dad, and he recognized it later, so he married one of Ishmael's daughters. Again, he was trying to paper over the problem. It wasn't going to help. And then we have Isaac calling Jacob in and blessed him, and he instructed him, telling him, "Do not take a wife from the daughters of Canaan." So that's just the bottom line. These guys are not supposed to take wives from the people of Canaan, which means Hamor is like barking up the wrong tree. It's not working. I could explain that one, but okay, it's just not working for what he's trying to sell. So Shechem also said to her father and brothers, Shechem's there, "May I obtain favor in your eyes. Whatever price you ask of me, I will pay it. Request a very great bride price and gift of me, and I will pay just what you ask of me. But give the young lady to me for a wife." The sons of Jacob answered Shechem and his father Hamor, but spoke deceitfully because he had violated their sister Dinah. Okay, so this is not going well, but Hamor doesn't know it's not going well. He's thinking we're moving along, but you get to the end, and he had violated their sister Dinah, and they understood a rape had taken place. That's what that means, and so they understood. So Shechem's ardor is put on display. He's saying, "I'm willing to pay anything so that you will give the young lady to me." Notice the change? There's a change in the Hebrew word. Goes to his dad, said, "Get the girl for me." Goes to the brothers and her dad and says, "Please, may I have the young lady?" Girl, young lady. There's a difference in honor being given. In his own private talk with his dad, he takes the honor away, but once he's in front of her brothers and sisters, he restores that level of honor when he refers to her. However, you can't undo what he's already done. And so, but he's willing to pay any bride price, and the sons of Jacob don't buy it. We get this hint when it says they answered deceitfully. Okay, we don't know what that means yet. And here's the deceitful part. They made it sound like, hey, this could work. That's the deceitful part. When they absolutely know it could not work. So their response is clearly a response which says, this is possible, but it's not possible. So, by the way, some of the sons of Jacob married Canaanite women. That did happen, and we'll be talking about that. Caused a mess in their lives. But they still had, and especially they still had that prohibition in place, and then it was codified in the Mosaic Code, which later on was given with Moses. So anyway, the sons of Jacob said to them, "We are unable to do this thing, to give our sister to a man who is uncircumcised, for it's a point of shame for us. Nevertheless, we will give permission to you for doing this if you become like us, and every one of your males may be circumcised or would be circumcised." Then we will give our daughters to you, and we will take your daughters for ourselves. We will live with you and be as one people. But if you will not listen to us and be circumcised, we will take our daughter and we will leave. Isn't it interesting? The sons of Jacob say, we'll take our daughter. But it's her sister. Okay? It's just because they're caught up in the discussion. You have one of our daughters, of all the family. And so they're saying, we will take her and leave. So now they take a position of power. They simply say, it'll be war. That's what they're saying. And they may not win the war, but they're willing to fight it, to take their sister and go. And so now Hamor and Shechem are being told, you really do need to agree to what we're saying. Otherwise, it's going to get very painful. And you're going to have to explain to your people why you're at war, because you raped one of ours. Because you'll notice in all the discussion, it never comes up. It hasn't come up. How do you defend that? You don't. So you ignore it. So it's a shameful plan. Their plan requiring circumcision means they were using the covenant sign deceitfully. Okay, think about it. They were using the covenant sign in a manipulative way. This sacred covenant sign that God had given to Abraham and the patriarchs and, was Israel's covenant sign, they're using it to manipulate these people and to set them up. Not a noble look. So their words were pleasing in the eyes of Hamor and the eyes of Shechem, the son of Hamor. The young man did not hesitate to get it done because he took delight in the daughter of Jacob, and he was more honored than all the household of his father. Then Hamor and his son Shechem came to the gate of their city and spoke to the men of their city and said, these men, they are at peace with us, and they live in the land and trade in it. Look, the land is spacious on both sides around them. Let us take their daughters for ourselves for wives and give our daughters to them. Okay. So now it's time for the sales job. You'll notice he doesn't say, because otherwise they're going to attack us, because, what happened is my son raped the young woman. That never comes up. Isn't that interesting? Because he's trying to paper it over. His son has done something grievous. So Hamor and Shechem both agree to the requirement. They think this is a good idea. Obviously, their goal, which they never mention to their own townspeople, is that Shechem gets to marry Dinah. That's not brought up. It's like, and they may have known it, but it's like it's not a part of the big sales job because, what do we care about whether or not? What's in it for me? And so Hamor and Shechem are selling what's in it for them. And so they're saying, hey, look, we've got this economic benefit. The land is spacious. By the way, the word spacious is kind of fun. This is an idiom in Hebrew. It's wide of hands. That's really, I don't know if you measure with hands. I don't know. But anyway, it means spacious. So the land is before us. It is wide of hands. And so they're pitching the idea. And they get done saying, this would be a great idea if we join together. And there's this one thing. There's just this one thing. The men will agree to live with us, to be one people if every male among us is circumcised as they are circumcised. Will not their livestock, their possessions, and all their animals be ours? Only let us agree with them, and they will live with us. Then they listened to Hamor and his son Shechem. Everyone who went out through the gate of the city, and everyone who went out through the gate of the city listened, and they were circumcised, every male, everyone who went out through the gate of the city. So, by the way, that phrase, everyone who went out through the gate of the city, could mean all of the men of the city, or it could mean the military men. There's just some discussion about that, but either way, it's at least the people who were able to defend the city. So they do mention the requirement. They get everyone to realize the economic impact. Now notice how the negotiation tactic has changed. They've said to Jacob and his sons, hey, the land is before you. You'll be able to buy property. You'll be able to go out and come in. All those things are wonderful. And they tell these guys, we'll own all their livestock. That would happen generationally, wouldn't it? If you're marrying and intermarrying, eventually all their livestock would become property of the people of the city. So they are selling the idea, and the entire city agrees. Now you're reading this and you're going, this is really weird. I don't think they ever married into a whole city. I wonder how that happened. Well, it happened that on the third day, while they were impaired by pain, two sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, the brothers of Dinah, each took his sword and came upon the unguarded city and killed every male. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the point of the sword and seized Dinah from Shechem's house and left. Well, we find out why it was a deceitful answer. They waited until the men were incapacitated because of their pain. Now remember, they didn't have antibiotics or any of that. They had fevers, and they had all of the things that you would imagine they had, tremendous soreness, unable to move, all those things that they were getting through. When they agreed to this, and by the way, they all knew the Egyptians were circumcised. They understood that there were other cultures that were circumcised, and they understood that if you joined those cultures and you were circumcised, it was going to be painful. But they were willing to do it for the benefit. And so after 3 days, they're sitting there and they are incapable of defending themselves. And so Simeon and Levi take advantage. They're full brothers with Dinah. Dinah was born to Leah. These two were born to Leah, as well as Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. Reuben too, are all Leah's kids. And so why it was only Simeon and Levi doing this, I don't know. Later on, Jacob confronts them when he's giving the prophecy about the future of the tribes of Israel, and he says some pretty strong things. I don't know if it's on this slide or one coming up, but he really identifies their counsel and their anger. Not all of the brothers bought into it. Maybe they didn't talk to all the brothers. And they felt confident enough that just the two of them, with whatever retinue they brought with them, because I'm certain that they had others with them, just not the other brothers, and they went in because they were fairly upset about the fact that their sister had been violated. And so anyway, they killed all the males, every last one of them. And then they took Dinah. That's where we know that they had Dinah yet. And so now they used the same word. They abducted her back. Okay, I just used the word, I think, seized. But it's basically the same word as what Shechem had done first. Seized her, abducted her, and the difference is here in English, they're not abducting her; she's theirs. So, you've got to change the word a little bit. So They used the mouth of the sword, the tip of the sword. The mouth of the sword is what it's called because it's the front end leading part of the sword, and they weren't hacking people. That's the interesting thing. They weren't hacking them. They were thrusting them through, which generally speaking, when you go to war with someone, there's a whole lot of hacking going on, except if they're helpless. Okay, you understand? That's the point that's being made. These are helpless people who are dying by sword thrusts because they are unable to defend themselves or mount a defense. Because normally if someone's trying to thrust you through, you're blocking it. And so the hacking is more what gets done and gets through the defenses and chops someone's arm or does all that. This is probably more you want to know about warfare. So I've never been involved in a fight like that, but I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express once, and so now, this is what happened. Then the other sons of Jacob came upon those who had been pierced by the sword. Literally, it says pierced. And they pillaged the city because they had violated their sister. They took their sheep, their cattle, their donkeys, the things in the city and in the countryside. They pillaged all their possessions and captured all the children and their wives, everyone who was in their houses. So now this is where the rest of the sons join in. They weren't involved in the initial slaughter, but they were sure willing to take advantage of it. And so they came in and enriched themselves. They were certainly feeling justified because of the treatment of their sister, even the half-brothers. Again, this was a shameful, lewd act which had been done against Israel. It was against all of them because Jacob was their father. Israel was their father. And so they, by this point, were agreeing at least to the fact, well, the deed's been done. We might as well get our payment for what they've done to our sister. And so they pillaged the goods and abducted the people. Okay, now, question for you. What do you think they did with all those people? Slaves. They probably sold a bunch of them because that was common. I mean, later on, they sell Joseph off to Midianite traders. And so you bet a lot of those people were about headed into slavery. They had been living as free people in the land in which they live. By the way, did the Lord absolutely hate the Canaanites? No. He said to Abraham, it's going to be generations before the sins of the Amorites have reached their full. He said, in the meantime, we're not driving them out. That'll take until your people come out of Egypt to drive them out. And remember, people could have a relationship with the Lord apart from Jacob and Israel and Abraham. I mean, the relationships, that's why they could go up into by Laban and be able to have a relationship. They had a relationship with the correct, the true God. And others did. I mean, Job was written about the time that Abraham lived, and he clearly had a relationship with God, don't you think? Yet he had nothing to do with Abraham. We know about Melchizedek. The only thing that connected him and Abraham is they met together, and Abraham gave him a tithe. So we think in our minds, oh, those are the enemies of God. Not yet. That's going to take some hundreds of years yet before they have absolutely turned away from any possible redemption. And the Lord says, okay, now it's time to drive them out. So don't think that this is a city where everything is absolutely evil. There were some pretty evil things that were done because of an unrestrained young man, but then wiping out the whole city? Who didn't even know about it? This is an unrestrained act of vengeance. And it certainly was murderous in rage and intensity, and it affected both Levi's and Simeon's future. Okay, so anyway, this was, all these people who had been living free were now into slavery, and whatever that meant for them at that time. So Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, you have stirred up trouble against me by making me foul-smelling to those who live in the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. I have a number of men, but if they join together against me, they will defeat us, and I myself and my household will be destroyed. However, they responded, should he have treated our sister as a whore? Just let that sit. Because they were outraged. And by the way, that last word is the correct way to translate that word, with all of the vitriol on their lips. By the way, the Jewish Publication Society translates it exactly the same way. I had to make sure before I had the courage to translate it this way, because everyone nicens it up, you understand? Well, as a lady of the night, whatever word you want to use. That's not what they were saying. What they were saying is something that bit as they said it. So, Jacob's saying, you have stirred up trouble against me. Had he? Oh yeah, they had. Jacob's got a number of men. We know that. But he didn't think he was strong enough when he came into Canaan to stand up against 400 men in Esau's company. He thought that was too much for him. He may have grown since then and have even more in his household without any doubt. But how is he going to, if several armies join forces, he's got a number of men. Some translations say Jacob said he had a few men. No, that's not what he said. He said, I have a number. He's saying, I do have men available to fight a battle. I just don't have enough available to fight a battle with all of them. So don't think of Jacob as being weak or not having a big retinue. He did. It just wasn't enough to defeat combined armies. And so he's a bit upset, and he says, you've made me a stench, and they could come out, and they could kill us all, and we could lose everything. See, their anger was so potent, they did not think of consequences. Jacob was thinking of consequences and I'm certainly He was horrified by what had happened because he understood justice by this time in his life. And it's not just to put every male in the city to the sword because of one man. And so, especially when you haven't even given terms to the city. Now, if the city adamantly refused to do justice, there may be a reason to go to war against them, but it's not going to be in the way that it was done here. Because here, the men didn't even have a chance to have a choice. If they had been told, listen, Shechem took their daughter and violated her, and they want justice, they may have said, yeah, they're right. We need to hand him over to whatever their justice is, because he has now done something that should not be done in anybody's culture. And so, but they never had that chance. And they slaughtered the whole city and took the women and children and either kept them as slaves or sold them as slaves. So Jacob knows these guys have made a mess of things. This is Genesis 49, 5-6. Simeon and Levi are brothers. The tools that belong to them are violent weapons. Let my soul not come into their secret discussions. Let not my honor be connected to their counsel. For they killed a man in their anger, and they hamstrung an ox by their agreement. And obviously they killed a lot of men in their anger and hamstrung a lot of animals, but it's kind of the part for the whole. And so anyway, this is his assessment at the end of his life when he's prophesying over the future of his children. By the way, was Levi an especially violent tribe in Israel? Oh, yeah. They were the ones that said, hey, who's all going to kill their relatives? Levi shows up with the swords. Yeah. Okay. I mean, you understand. These guys were martial at their hearts. They were like, hey, you need some killing done? And then he puts them in charge of the priesthood. And they had to use weapons. I mean, you understand, these were the guys in the temple area that were in charge with doing what? Doing a lot of sacrifices and stuff like that, bloody work, but they'd also kill people who violated the temple. They were a military force the entire time. You don't think so? Think about what happened when Athaliah killed all the princes of Israel. And you only had young Joash who was left, and when he was 7 years old, they revealed who he was. And who was it that protected him? It was all the Levites and their weapons. They were always a military force, but they were also the ones who were in charge of the sacrifices. And it was only because they stood up for righteousness that time in the camp of Israel that their calling was shifted from basically disappearing, like Simeon, and it was shifted into something that would be used. That edge that they had would be used for the kingdom of God. But in the meantime, this is way before that, and so Jacob's saying, you've really messed us up, and we don't have enough. If they ally against us, we are stuck. And their harsh response tells Jacob one thing: they don't care. That's why it's so biting. They're like, you're asking us to do something that's impossible. And basically they're trying to shame him. If you understood the damage. I mean, and by the way, Absalom would have said the same thing about his sister when Amnon raped her. Okay, that would have happened. And there were others that have slipped my mind at the moment, but where there is an absolute rage on behalf of the relatives, and they take advantage or they kill people as a result. But Absalom was certainly one of them, and Amnon. And he plotted his revenge for years, and waited until just the right moment, and then he took him out because his sister was violated. Like I said, in the Proverbs, it says this is a dumb thing. When you hear wisdom calling in the streets, stay away from those who are involved in promiscuity. That's a polite way of saying it. But stay away because basically you're being led to the death. You go, oh, okay. That's wisdom. So, in all of this bloodiness, Jacob and his family were being marked by the surrounding cultures as they don't play well with their neighbors. So do you think anyone tried to get close to them after this where they said, hey, let's all intermarry and have... No. If the word got out that Jacob had violated an agreement, that's what he's worried about. He violated an agreement. You don't violate agreements like that without having the neighboring people come after you and say, you did something which was a violation of a sacred agreement in our area, and now we're going to make you pay for it. Because if we don't, everyone is going to do this same thing over and over and over again. We can't have that. And so by doing what Jacob did, now God intervened on their behalf. We're going to read about that next time. He intervened. But it was certainly, Jacob assessed things correctly. Without God's intervention, they may have been wiped off the face of the map. In the meantime, God was able to use what they did for evil and work it into good, because now no one else wanted to do that. And so he kept them separate through all of this. Okay. By the way, pay attention, because that's how God was working with Israel. That's how he works with us. A lot of times we do stupid things. But when the Bible says that he works all things for good, or that he works with his people so that all things turn out for good, that can be translated either way, that's a pretty good confirmation of the fact that even our mess-ups God can use to help us on our calling. He used a fairly grievous mess-up to launch them on their calling. And so, again, take encouragement. Sometimes Satan wakes us up in the middle of the night and says, you've messed up too much to be used by God. And you're going, nah, Jacob's saying, hold my beer. I've not slaughtered a whole city over my personal anger. I may be stupid and I may have done some pretty dumb things, but I don't think I can achieve quite that level. And so, you just answer Satan and let him know he's, not having an impact. Anyway, let's pray. Lord, I thank you for this opportunity today to study this sordid story. And I'm not thanking you for the sordid story, but I'm thanking you for the lessons that we can learn and that we can grow in and that we can understand about how you deal with your people and how you continually cover for us even when we do silly things. Lord, let us never use that as an excuse, but help free us from all of those past regrets which the enemy tries to use against us. In your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen.